Hello and welcome to my short summary and analysis of the fifth season, a 2015 novel by Nora Jemisin, and the first installment of a series of 3. So let's jump right in. Nora Jemisin won the Hugo Awards for all 3 installments in this novel. So this is a huge success and it's a very popular series. And on top of that, she has not only won it 3 times in a row, but she is also the first African American writer to win the Hugo Award in general. The novel itself, or the 3 novels itself, the action takes place on a continent called the Stillness, which is a continent not dissimilar from Earth, but also very distinct, because there is seismic existential events that shake up everything and destroy most of civilization every couple of years. So the people have to learn how to find their way around that. The story follows a girl called Damaya, which has this special ability and that makes her able to control seismic energy and divert it and do all sorts of things with it. The novel is written in a highly non-linear fashion, and we see how the story unfolds through Damaya's eyes as she is very young and called Damaya, and later as she is in education and she is called Cyanide, and much later where she is called Esun. And at the beginning of the novel, you don't really know that it is the same person that it is talking about, because you only have the titles of the chapters and you think, maybe it's about 3 distinct people. And then later you realize that it all comes together and it is the same person that we are talking about at different times in their lives. So as we see here on the second slide, these 3 characters are all the same, but the chapters starts, like you see, chapter 1 starts with Esun, and then Damaya, which is like the youngest version of the woman, starts only in chapter 2, and then we go 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth. So we see that it jumps back and forth, and somewhere in the middle of the novel you start realizing, oh, it's the same person. So the next 3 slides are just going to be bullet points about the summary of what happens in each of these arcs. And instead of going through this non-linear fashion, I just linearized everything so it's easier to follow. And up here, I have a diagram that I prepared, which tries to kind of put everything into one flow, and we see all the interactions of the different characters and places. So as you see here, it starts out at Damaya, who is a orogene, one of these people that can control seismic energy. And it's not quite clear what it is at this point, but they have an organ inside their brain that makes them feel all the things that is going on inside Earth, and they can control it. She doesn't have a great family, and at some point there is a guardian that collects her, and the person is called Shafa. And he takes her away from the parents, and he is very intimidating. At one point, he breaks her hand to make a point. And it's not quite clear where he brings her and what is going on. So we have this guardian, Shafa, and he meets Damaya. And where are they off to? She is brought to the fulcrum, which is basically like a school or an institute for all the people that have this seismic power, the orogenes. So as we see, Damaya and Shafa go to the fulcrum. At the fulcrum, Damaya meets different kind of people, like they also have names, Mashisha and Crack, and there is some intrigue. She generally doesn't have a lot of friends, and but is very into studying a lot about orogeny, the science of orogene, and figuring out what this power can do for you. At some point, we meet a girl called Binov. This is over here, and it's clear from the outset that this Binov person is not an orogene. So it's not quite clear what she is even doing in the fulcrum, but somehow she intrigues Damaya that they go on an expedition inside the fulcrum, and they find an ancient socket. Like they are downstairs in a forbidden part of the fulcrum, and there is this huge socket into Earth, and it's not quite clear what is going on, and a huge mystery starts unfolding. Unfortunately, they get caught, and Binoff vanishes, and we don't hear for her for a while, at least. And Damaya gets reprimanded, and she has to do some sort of test to show that, like to test her ability in orogeny. And after that, she gets her first like orogene name. So this is different from the name that she is given at birth, and she will become Cyanide. And like at this point in chapter 17 and 18, we start realizing, Cyanide is the same person as Damaya. So as we see in the diagram over here, from the fulcrum, we have Binoff, and from the fulcrum, we also have Damaya emerging as basically Cyanide. Okay. Now we go to the next arc of Cyanide herself. So it starts off as Cyanide, which we don't know yet that is actually the same person as Damaya. She gets a job to go to Alia, which is another place on the stillness, and go together with a 10 ringer, which is basically an extremely, extremely powerful orogene, which is the level of 10 or maybe even more, but nobody can evaluate it because nobody is on a higher level than him, called Alabaster. So as you see in the diagram here, Cyanide meets Alabaster, and they together go to Alia, which is this place that has a problem, that the harbor is blocked by a coral reef, and they should remove it. And since they have the power of this seismic energy, they should be able to like loosen everything up and free the harbor from blocking ships coming in. So they are on the way to go to Alia, and Alabaster is a very grumpy person, and like they don't really get along very well, and it's not quite clear why he is always grumpy. But one thing that is for sure is, as they pass through the lands, there are these nodes, which is like houses that where orogenes work, or maybe one orogene works, and tries to quell all the earthquakes that happen in this area. So since the stillness, the continent, has a lot of these earthquakes, the fulcrum, as we have learned before, trains orogenes, tries to deploy people that can quell all these earthquakes, so there is not constant catastrophe everywhere. But it turns out that it's a very sinister type of way how they do this, namely orogenes that are not able to be extremely skillful about their orogeny but are still powerful. They're kind of getting locked up into one of these nodes, and then they are underground, and just forever they have to quell these shakes, but they are not really free and they are imprisoned there. So that's one reason why Alabaster is very upset. So they get to Alia, and nobody is really friendly to them, and we start learning that orogenes are not really getting along very well with the people that don't have the ability of orogeny. But we don't really know why they are so mean to them in particular. And it culminates in an attempt to kill Alabaster by poisoning him. But it's not, at this point, we don't really know why this is the case. But Cyanide, while Alabaster is still recovering from the attempt of poisoning, removes the coral reef in the harbor. But what happens is it was not really the coral reef that was blocking the harbor, but underneath there was a huge obelisk. So what is an obelisk? In the stillness, from ancient civilizations that get deleted every couple of years, sometimes there are some sort of relics that remain, and obelisks are like huge stone, for what we know, relics that hover in the air, but nobody really knows what they're doing. They're just there and menacing over certain places. So once Cyanide removes the coral reef from the harbor, this huge obelisk emerges from the water, and it's crazy, right? But generally, it seems like the task is fulfilled, and they wander around Alia and discuss about the different things and why everybody's so mean towards them and so forth, as they meet a guardian Edki. So the guardians, as Shafa earlier, who brought Damaya to the fulcrum, is a certain like a caste of people that are in control of the orogenes. So the guardians are also the people that bring the orogenes to the nodes and are somehow in charge of the fulcrum, but it's not quite clear at this point what their motives are and why they are doing what they're doing, basically. And this particular guardian here, as you see, guardian named Edki, he attacks Cyanide and Alabaster, and in a pretty deadly way, almost deadly way so, because the Guardians have some sort of ability that negates orogeny. So even though Alabaster is one of the most powerful orogenes on the planet, he is not really able to do some, let's say, cool seismic tricks that might incapacitate the Guardian. But Cyanide gets a sleight of hand, basically, because the Guardian is focused on Alabaster, and she can tap into the energy of the obelisk, and the obelisk gets destroyed, and a lot of things happen at once. And it's not quite clear how it goes, but we wake up 2 chapters later on an island off the coast called Meof, and apparently a stone eater, which is also new at this point, called Antimony, brought them there. So we are very confused what just happened. So we see we left Alia and Alabaster and Cyanide are in Meof. Okay, so a stone eater is sort of a almost mystical figure, which is like humanoid, but we are not quite clear whether they look like humans in general. And we don't know anything about their motives and what they're doing, but they're basically made of stone, and they can travel very quickly through Earth itself. And we don't know why Antimony brought them there or what her motives are. She just basically saved them while the obelisk in Alia exploded and probably everybody died. But we don't know about that, and there will be later some closure about that. So they're at this new place and try to get along on this island Meof, which is basically very safe because people don't really want to go to islands since there is these catastrophes and earthquakes all the time. There is also tsunamis, and people that like generally stopped going out into the ocean because it's very dangerous. But apparently there is a group of people there that many of them are orogenes and they are not frowned upon, and they just live like normal people as opposed to how they are treated on the continent, and they don't have to go to the fulcrum or are enslaved or anything. They're just normal about it. Okay, and one of them is especially nice or especially intriguing for Alabaster and Cyanide, and this one is called Inon, and they form some sort of polyamorous relationship between the three of them, from which also a son emerges, where Cyanide and Alabaster have a son. But unfortunately, this happiness that they found, and it seems they are generally happy about this, lasts only for about 2 years, and then they get found out by the Guardians. At some point, they are up on the hill or something, and from far away they see ships coming in, likely because one of their expeditions was too close to the shore. Maybe they got seen. In any case, the Guardians are on the way and are going to destroy everything they found on Meof. Well, in fact, they're going to kill Inon, and they're going to kill most of the Meovites, the people that live on Meof. And Cyanide gets extremely upset, and Alabaster too, and they try everything to like hurl giant boulders at the ships and destroy everything, but they can't really do much against the Guardians because they are so powerful in negating their orogene powers. But Cyanide kind of like manages to is almost a bit said too much, but like she triggers some sort of cataclysmic event in which she also kills her son, which is an extremely traumatic event. Of course, probably most guardians die from what we know, and Alabaster kind of vanishes into the earth in some sort of mysterious way. Probably he gets transported away by the stone eaters or something. We don't really know about that at this point. So as we see on the diagram, Inon is one of these Meovites, and the guardians attack Meov. Koru is Alabaster's and Cyanide's son, and unfortunately it already ends here for him because he dies. Alia is broken. Meov is basically uninhabited now, and Cyanide goes back to the continent and gives herself a new name, namely Esun, and she wanders around. It's not quite clear what happens, but it all sounds very bleak. And then we go to the last arc, namely the arc of Esun, with whom the novel actually starts. So in the very beginning, in the first chapter, we start with her, and we learn, like in the second bullet point here, that Chicha, her new husband, killed her son that she had with him, Uche, and kidnapped her daughter Nasun. So when we read chapter 1, this seems to be the first bad thing that happens. But now in retrospect, where we might have read the whole novel already, we realize, oh no, like Nasun, aka Esun, aka Cyanide, already had so many people die and lives destroyed. And now for some reason, there is more misery awaiting. And we learned that Chicha probably didn't know that she was an origin. And as he found out, because origins are so frowned upon, he killed the son and ran away. Before the first chapter, there is a prologue, so I'm jumping to the first bullet point now. And a person that we don't know at this point, because Alabaster is not introduced at this point, but it is Alabaster, triggers a fifth season. So the fifth season is, like as the title of the book, is one of these cataclysmic events that destroy most of the civilization on the stillness. So this happens, and then in the next, like in the first chapter, we learn, oh no, Esun's son is dead, and Chicha fled with Nasun, and she is making her way out to go on a journey and find her daughter, and is determined to kill her husband or find revenge. As everything goes down the drain anyways, because the civilizations are going to disappear. As we see on the chart here, here is Esun and her family, and she goes onto the search for her daughter and her husband, or now ex-husband then probably. So on the way, she meets Hoa, no other name, just this small boy, who turns out is a stone eater himself, but he doesn't reveal himself as that. But he does some pretty creepy things, and so like we as a reader, we are kind of a bit frightened maybe, and we don't realize, okay, who is this boy? But as long as he is not doing any harm to Esun, maybe we're fine with it. And one thing that he brings on board is that he can sense origins, so he can help Esun determine where they should go to find her daughter and her husband, because her daughter is probably also an origin, and that's why he can sense her. Further down the line, they meet Tonki, and I think this was one of the nicer twists at the end of the book. As you see on the flow diagram, as we see, Binov is actually Tonki, okay, which is this bullet point here. Binov actually followed from the fulcrum Cyanide, or she had people follow Cyanide all over these years and years, became another person or assumed a new name to basically run into her or have her found out again to go back to her. So somehow Tonki is extremely interested in what Esun has to offer, but we are not really, till the end of the novel, we don't find out what that is. So on the way, they found this underground community called Castrima with another named person called Yika, where they also live with other orogenes and maybe even another stone eater, where they are for now in some sort of relative security. So this is the last point here in Castrima. And we kind of learned that Hoa basically was around all this time. So in the destruction of Meof and the destruction of all the people there, Hoa seemed to be already there, as we learn from the narration, because the narration turns out at some point is Hoa telling the story to somebody, maybe us, the reader. And he says something like, and I was always observing her and seeing where she's going. And for some reason, he also accompanied her on her search and helped her. So this is kind of one of the cliffhangers that will lead us into the second novel at some point. And the very last cliffhanger, which is a great sentence then to finish the book, in my opinion, is they are in Castrima, and at this point, like, we haven't seen Alabaster in a long time, and for what we know, he might have died on Meof. But Antimony, again, mysteriously brings Alabaster to this com, and he is like almost dying or very broken. Parts of him is turned to stone. Like, we don't know what is going on. And then it ends with him saying, "Have you ever heard of something called a moon?" And this has been actually been foreshadowed in some sort of interlude after the first third of the book, where the narrator muses about the people of Meof don't really know that something is missing in the sky, because like if there is no moon, how would you think, oh, there could be a moon, right? So a huge a huge plot hook for the second installment of the novel, and what is going to happen with the moon, who is nota bene also made from stone, right? So this is going to be very interesting. And so for the last few minutes, I'm going to mention a couple of themes that go through the book. So one thing that Nora K. Jemisin said in an interview is that it's kind of interesting that stone doesn't perish. Like, if you want something to last on a tombstone or these ancient tablets, maybe Moses' tablets, like, people write on stone. But it's interesting, the aspect that humans still manage to tamper with it. Like, even something that is set in stone is being manipulated by humans. And throughout the story, like, there's small hints of all this lore called the stone lore that is transported knowledge down the history of how people should behave during the fifth season and everything. But as we learn from Alabaster and some other people, oh, maybe not everything that is in the lore or everything that the scholars tell us is true. And we have these hints of the Guardians being maybe a bit corrupt or very corrupt, that people in the Fulcrum that we don't know why they are doing all these things. So like, there is a lot of hierarchies and a lot of facets to this whole situation. It's not just these people versus these people, but it's a lot of people with different identities and different motives that try to bring forth their agendas, right? And another thing that is very interesting is, and like, in my opinion, sci-fi / fantasy is very helpful in empowering these ideas, is that you can subvert expectations in a almost like very nonchalant way. So as Nora K. Jemisin says also in an interview, it's like she wants to subvert the expectations, in the sense, for example, that Esun, as we meet her, like, she is some 40-year-old something black overweight woman, and then she chuckles, and I don't know, like some sort of self-insert of herself, and it's great because we don't have to like talk about it, or it's not a big deal. It's just, here, this is this protagonist, and we don't really talk about it. And there's a couple of other instances where, like, from traditional sci-fi, which is like very male oriented or written by all these white male people in the last 100 years, like Asimov and Friends, which is great sci-fi, but also very typecast. And with these types maybe in mind, if you have read a lot of Asimov, then you go into it, and then Nora K. Jemisin does a flip on the identity, and you go like, oh, I didn't expect that, or and these things happen a lot, and it's very interesting to have your expectations subverted. Yeah. And something that some critics didn't like so much, but I enjoyed it very much, is that the story arc of Esun is told in the second person show. So the narrative voice goes, and you did this and you did this and then you went there, instead of Esun did this and Esun did that. And some people find it a bit irritating, but I find it very interesting and like refreshing, even though I don't think it's very easy to pull off in a smooth way. And there is also a nice reference in one of the interviews where Jemisin says that she likes playing video games, and to her the like this you perspective is kind of natural, because if you play the video game in the first person and like the story is happening to you, which is kind of nicely implemented in one of these arcs, and I think in a non-intrusive way. So I enjoyed the style of it very much. Yeah, I think that's it. It took a bit longer than I expected. I will upload the slides and the diagram somewhere in the description, and so you can have a look at it later or use it for your homework. Like, there is no copyright or anything, you can just use it. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.